Hey folks, welcome back. In this section of the course, we've covered ways that S3 is used in DevOps. And we're going to conclude this section with one more lesson. And in this lesson, we will show how S3 can be used to store log files for elastic load balancing. Now, elastic load balancing provides access logs that capture detailed information about requests sent to your load balancer. Such information as time the request was received, the client's IP address, latencies, request paths, and server responses. And you can see how helpful this would be in troubleshooting. Key point is access logging is an optional feature and it's disabled by default. But after it's enabled, the Elastic Load Balancer captures the logs and stores them in an S3 bucket that you specify. Now, you can disable access logging at any time. Another key point is that these logs can be server-side encrypted, and the logs will be automatically encrypted before being stored in your S3 bucket and decrypted when you access it. So you don't need to take any additional action. Now, there's no extra charge for the access logs, but you are charged storage costs for S3, although you are not charged for the bandwidth used by the load balancer to send your log files to S3. All right, so in the DevOps doctrine, let's go to S3, and let's go to exporting log data. Now, there's not too many actors involved here. We're just using Elastic Load Balancer, generally fronting an auto-scaling group and some EC2 instances. We're going to need a policy, which we'll create here momentarily, to allow our load balancer to store the logs in our S3 bucket. Not too many actors, but the steps are a little bit detailed, and there are a couple places you can go wrong that I'll point out. But our steps are we're going to create an S3 bucket. We're going to go to set permissions on the bucket. At that point, we're going to go into the policy generator, and we're going to generate a policy giving our load balancer access to the S3 bucket. The policy generator is going to generate the code for us, and then we can copy and paste this code into our S3 bucket policy area and save it. Once that is done, we can go over to the EC2 console, go into our load balancers, and select a load balancer. We could create one, but I'm just going to use a load balancer that I already have. Now, when you go into the load balancer, it's going to come up at the description tab, and we're going to choose configure access logs. And again, this by default is disabled. So we're going to enable that. And when we do that, we're going to have to specify where in S3 we want to store these logs. So once that is complete, our ELB access logs will be sent to S3. Now the default interval is 60 minutes. You can set this to 5 minutes, but those logs will be sent to S3. Now, upon enabling these access logs, the load balancer will send a test file to S3 just to verify everything. So we can go to our bucket and just verify receipt of this test file. Okay, so in the management console, let's go over to S3 and we'll create a new bucket, give it a name, click Next. Not going to do anything detailed here, so we'll just click Next, Next again, and create bucket. Okay, so we need a policy for our bucket. Let's go into our bucket. And let's go to permissions. And we can just go to bucket policy. Now, if your bucket already has an attached policy, we can just add the code that we're going to generate to that policy. But our bucket doesn't have a policy. Let's go to policy generator. All right, so we'll generate our policy. Type of policy, S3 bucket policy, effect allow. Now, for principal, we need to enter the account ID for elastic load balancing in our region. This information can be found in the elastic load balancing area on the Enable Access Logs page. So the code for Elastic Load Balancing in the US West Region, Oregon is as such. All right, so our AWS service, S3, let's think about this even before we show the dropdown. What actions do we want? So what are we doing? We are putting access logs into the S3 bucket. Everything put into S3 is viewed as an object. So we want put object. That's all that we need to do. All right, now we need to enter the ARN for our bucket. If you run into problems, this would be a likely culprit. Just getting this ARN correct. So it's ARN :AWS :S3. After S3, you want 3 colons. Then you want your bucket name. Then you enter a key name. Now, you just make this up. This is going to end up being like a folder in your S3 bucket. So let's call it My Logs. Then AWS Logs. Then your AWS account ID. Now, this is important, and it won't work without this, a / and an asterisk. All right, so we can click Add Statement, and then we can click Generate Policy. There's our policy. Action Put Object, Effect Allow. There's our ARN. It's good to review this quickly. This looks good, and again, I found without this asterisk, it's not going to work. So let's copy this, and we'll just leave this open just in case. Let's go back over to S3, and we can plug that into our policy editor. And we can click Save, and we'll find out if we did everything correctly. We've set up our S3 bucket with our policy, which is going to allow this put object action. And remember, the principle we put in the ID for Elastic Load Balancing. So now we can work with our load balancer to finish this up. So let's go over to EC2, and let's go to Load Balancers. Now, we could create a new load balancer for this, but I'm just going to do some reuse here. Select my load balancer. Let's get a little bit more room. And on the description tab, I want to go down to Attributes. Now, remember, by default, our access logs are disabled. Let's click Configure Access Logs. So we want to check Enable Access Logs. Now, this is our interval. So we have a 60-minute interval. We could change that to 5. Let's just keep it at 60. Now remember, we're going to get a test file upon enabling the access logs. So we're not going to have to wait 60 minutes. And then we just specify our S3 location. And remember our prefix, My Logs, and we can click Save. It's now enabled, 60-minute intervals. The logs are going to our bucket. And no news is good news. If we had entered that ARN incorrectly for the S3 bucket, we'd have gotten some kind of an error here. But we're in good shape. Now, everything is set up. Just to complete this lesson, we can go back to S3 and verify receipt of our test log file. Let's go to S3, a bucket for ELB. So it created My Logs. There's our AWS Logs folder with our account number, and there is our test file. Now, there's not much to this test file. It's just the sentence verifying that access logs have been enabled with a timestamp. But now on 60-minute intervals, we will get our access logs for our load balancer. And with that, we have completed this lesson. So go ahead and mark it complete, and let's move on to the next.